Yes, guys, another draft rankings video, my top 60 series split into fours. Today, we'll be exploring the 16 to 30 bracket of that list. It's been a really tough period for me here trying to put these lists together. As I said in the previous one, to make this video, I did kind of go back to try to look through some of the tapes from earlier in the season, look at development, look at trying to avoid recency bias in that as well by looking at some of the early performances so we don't get too caught up with the final series and those sorts of things. So it did change a few things for me. Remembering again that this video, it's not a mock draft, it is just my rankings and if I have the next pick in the draft, who I would take. So I won't talk any longer than that off the top. I think I've sort of covered everything there and I'll get stuck into the list. Okay, so Isaac Kako comes in at 16. I've got three players on the graph there. I've got him and I've got Harry Armstrong and Jobe Shanahan at 17 and 18 respectively. So why have I gone with a small forward? And I've even gone with two small forwards ahead of Armstrong and Shanahan. If you remember back to the previous video, I had Joe Berry at 15. I just think in the modern game, I talk about getting the ball in quickly. It becomes more of a ground ball game inside forward 50. You certainly still need those key position forwards to be there, to compete in the air, to bring the ball to ground, but you can get different sort of players to do that. Now, if you get a key position forward, someone like a Jeremy Cameron, who's just a complete hybrid that can do everything, you can pick up the ball, you can go into the midfield, get it deep, all of those sorts of things, you take that guy because he's ticking a lot of boxes. But I don't think any of the key position forwards in this draft have sort of those level of traits of like a Jeremy Cameron, even someone like an Aaron Cadman perhaps in a previous draft. So that's why I've knocked these guys back a little bit, and that's why I've gone with Kako, because I think he can be the most influential player in the forward half of the ground out of all of these guys. Kako's a complete score involvement machine. Almost every possession he gets, well, that's a bit of a lie, but over half of his possessions end up turning into scores. He's speedy, he's explosive, he can run through the midfield as well, we've seen that, so he obviously has a little bit of an endurance base to go with that exceptional speed. Often with small forwards, they do struggle a little bit at the long distance stuff. That's why I've gone with Kako. I just ultimately see him as just a high impact player and someone that converts to the AFL really well. You've got Armstrong and Shanahan there. I think it's really tough to split these two players. I think there's definitely an argument for Shanahan, particularly that VFL form that he showed. I end up probably going Armstrong. I think maybe slightly better at contested marking than on the hit up on the lead than Shanahan, where he's a little bit more of that style. Harry Armstrong also has that long, booming left kick, and he can use that to hit up targets across the field as well. So I think if he does pick up the ball a bit deeper, he can use that. Albeit, Armstrong has been a very stay-at-home forward this year. Like, he's only averaged about 8 to 9 disposals across any competition he's played. So I would like to see him get a little bit higher up the field and be more influencing the game. But ultimately, that's why I've gone with these guys back at that sort of level. It just sort of haven't been able to fit them ahead of some of those other prospects that I think affect the game a little bit more. So the next three players that I've got on the list there is Jesse Detoli, Ollie Hannaford and Cooper Hines at 19, 20 and 21. Again, probably the theme of the small forwards in Jesse Detoli, Ollie Hannaford. They're two players that can, play in the forward half of the ground. They can run through the midfield. They have some excellent athletic traits, particularly Hannaford. I think he tested really well at the combine. He has that speed and that agility. Detoli, probably a little bit more of a cerebral player, someone that relies on his footy IQ, his hands, his creativity, those sort of exploits, but doing that in the forward half of the ground. I loved his work for Vic Metro, some of the targets that he was able to find inside forward 50 with those low darts that he kicks. And then Ollie Hannaford, just that perfect modern player, applies pressure. He's probably not as good on the eye as, say, a Jesse Detoli with ball in hand, but just as fun to watch in a different way with his aggression, his physicality, those sort of attributes. So perfect modern game player, Ollie Hannaford, and that's what put those two smalls in Detoli and Hannaford, who are both around the 180 centimetre mark, that put them over Hines, who I see some of the traits in Hines that are going to be really useful. He is a big-bodied midfielder that can play forward of the ball, has those overhead marking traits that I talked about with some of the other big-bodied mids. I don't think he's quite as good on the ball as any of those other guys, and that's what ultimately drove him down. If you're a team, though, and you're looking for a big-bodied midfielder And you've got a couple of other really high-end players in there with, speed and agility and smaller bodied players. I think getting Cooper Hines in the draft will be a really, really good player. He's good enough to be that anchor as a big-bodied mid, and I think that's as good a kind of pump up that I can give him in this video. So those three are 19, 20, 21, which brings me to a standalone graphic here in Jack Whitlock. I just had to get him this high up the draft just for the fact that he really could be anything from an athletic point of view. He's 200 centimeters tall. He can take huge grabs. He can leap in the air, and he can do ground level stuff that really belies that height that he has. So my only question on Jack Whitlock and why he doesn't ultimately get higher up this list is I sort of don't know exactly what he's going to be at AFL level. I know he's a forward essentially, but I don't know, he's got other traits. I could see him being this sort of Tim English style ruckman, a little bit undersized. He's got pretty good physicality, but it doesn't have the same physicality as some of the key forwards in this draft, like a Shanahan, like a Cale Guerin or someone like that. So I can see the potential, but I don't exactly know what it is. So that's probably leaving him to kind of slide back into the 20s for me. And I don't know which team's going to be I know exactly what to do with him. So that's probably my qualms on Jack Whitlock, which brings us to 23, 24, 25, which is a group of midfielders here that I found really difficult to split. I think this is kind of the right place for them, between 20 and 30. Probably one of these guys will go a little bit higher and the other two will probably slide. We'll probably see on draft night, but I find it hard to split them. You've got Sam Marshall, the power running, that high intensity running, not a speed factor, but just the ability to be able to just push and push and push and run at that high intensity. It means that he just wears everyone out. I think the best sort of illustration of that was game 1 of the national champs against South Australia, where he had, I think it was 14 disposals in the last quarter when he was just running on top of the ground. On the ball, he's just pretty efficient. He just hits his targets. He just uses his handballs well. He doesn't bite off anything that he can't, but he's just always an option on transition. Xavier Lindsay, much the same. I don't think he has quite the running ability of Sam Marshall to go at those higher speeds. He might have a better endurance base, but he doesn't have the speed level at that high intensity. So he comes in second. I just think his year was really compelling. His inside work is really good as well as his outside game. And Sam Marshall and Xavier Lindsay, you'd have to say they're generally probably more suited to the outside, but they do have shown the ability to be able to go in and win the ball on the inside as well. And that leaves Tom Gross, who's just this little hard nut mid forward that, just seems to inevitably hit the scoreboard. He's not the prettiest player, but he's very admirable the way that he goes in with his physicality, his contest work, and he's even a little bit undersized, but he still gets it done. I've talked about the Rory Sloane, the Cal Ward sort of comparisons with Gross, and I remember talking to Pommy and Oz the other day, and he said he's the one that he could be a sleeper in this draft. So I like him. I think on the ball, he's not as good a quality as some of those other players, and that's why I've marked him below a Lindsay, a Marshall, and players like Detoli as well from a midfield standpoint. So that moves us on now to a group of tools that we've got here. So I'm actually going to bring up a 4-way player slide here to show this. So you've got Cale Guerin, you've got Matt Whitlock, you've got Alex Dodson, and you've got Jonty Fall there. And I'm going to sort of explain, I guess, the rankings. So Guerin at 26, Whitlock at 27, Dodson 28, Fall at 29. Guerin comes in as the top prospect there. I went back, as I said, I went back through this video to try to look at some of the early performances. And you do, as a person based in Melbourne, you do miss some of the Western Australian performances, the South Australian performances. So you have to be a little bit careful about that. Guerin's versatility first, to be able to play that ruck role and pick up bulk disposals in that role. He gets a lot of ruck gathers, gets a lot of clearances for his side in the Waffle Colts there. You've also got the fact that he's just a super, super strong and physical presence inside the forward 50. So he takes a lot of contested marks. He wills himself to the front of those contests. And I think he's being a little bit underrated just for the fact that he's in Western Australia at the moment. So he tops the list. Then you've got the project of Matt Whitlock, who's probably even less of a tied down to a position than his brother Jack, who I talked about. So similar things with Matt. Been more of a key defender this season, but has played in the forward half of the ground. Again, he could be anything at 200 centimetres, but sort of don't exactly know where he's going to lie. So that's why he comes in there. I think the talent level is too good to put him any lower than that. Then I've got Alex Dodson at 28, just coming in after Matt Whitlock. He's the one coming from a basketball background, so definitely from a projection point of view, you could see him being the best of all of these tools on this list. He's a little bit taller too, at I think 204 centimeters he comes in, so has that extra ability to be able to play in the ruck, and I think he's going to be able to pick up the footy around the ground. And as I'm saying this, I'm almost talking myself out of him being as low as 28, but that's where I've gone, just because he probably hasn't put down the consistency of football of some of the others. And then I've got Jonty Fall, who I think he's probably the least talented of these tools between 20 and 30 here, and that's why I've ultimately got him at 29. But I think when we talk about that player that's sort of forward of the ball, that just competes in the air, brings the ball to ground and gets the smalls into the game, I think is that sort of power forward. Jonty Fall is one of the best at just competing in those contests. We saw that in the Coates Talent League Grand Final, what he was able to do there from just a competitive point of view. So I like him there, and I think if a team can get a couple of midfield picks in this draft and then grab someone like a Jonty Fall, they'll be really happy with that. And then a standalone at the end here who, just on quality, has to be in the top 30. He's got really good ball use. He's got really good dynamic running ability on the outside. And he's got good overhead marking as well, so he ticks a lot of boxes, and I think he's got a lot of AFL traits, but what's been the question mark for me with Moraes has just been that ability to be able to step up to the next level. When he's gone up, he's just looked a little bit small, and that sort of ends up sliding him down, even though he has those attributes. So he rounds out the top 30 for me. That is part 2 of this video series of ranking the top 60 players in the draft. So I think we'll leave this one there. That is my 16 to 30 draft rankings, how I would pick the players if I was a recruiter. Let me know what you guys would do in the comments below. Did I get any wrong? Which ones did I get right? Are there any sort of bolters in there that you didn't expect? Let me know, and I'll see you guys next time.